What if Ned Stark had done the unthinkable? Not the noble thing, not the honorable thing, the necessary thing. What if instead of hiding Jon Snow as his bastard, Ned Stark had looked at that newborn boy, the son of Rhaegar Targaryen and Lyanna Stark, and said, "This child is the rightful heir to the Iron Throne, and I will put him there even if the realm burns around us." Robert Baratheon stood triumphant after the rebellion, his warhammer soaked in royal blood, a kingdom shattered behind him. The Mad King was dead, Rhaegar slain at the Trident, and all who bore the name Targaryen were hunted like animals. Or so he thought. At the Tower of Joy, in the scorching sun of dawn, Ned Stark stood over the body of his sister. Her blood was everywhere. Her breaths were shallow, whispers weak, the ghost of the strong-willed Lyanna fading. She begged one thing with lips cracked and pale, "Promise me, Ned." But in this moment the weight of 7 kingdoms crushed the promise. Ned looked at the child, dark hair, quiet eyes, the blood of 2 dynasties in his tiny fists. Not a bastard, not a mistake, not a shameful secret, but a king, the only true heir to the Iron Throne. And in that flash of clarity, Ned Stark, Warden of the North, made a decision that would change the fate of Westeros forever. He would not lie. He would not cower. He would not hide the boy. The world thought Targaryens had been extinguished, but this child, Jon J. Harris, Ned would name him for safety, but call him Jon still, was the one ember left in the ashes. And Ned would fan it into fire. He left the Tower of Joy not in secrecy, but in open declaration. He rode into King's Landing not as Robert's somber friend, but as a man with a claim, with a legacy, with a living heir in his arms. He did not wait for approval. He marched directly into the throne room, while Robert still sat there in blood-soaked triumph. And that's where it happened, the first break. Robert Baratheon had won a war. He expected gratitude, loyalty, silence. But instead his oldest friend approached with a child and a name that felt like betrayal. Targaryen. What in the 7 hells is this? Robert growled, the anger already bubbling beneath his grief. Ned held his ground, his voice calm but fierce. "This is Jon, son of Rhaegar, son of Lyanna. Your rebellion was fought on a lie, Robert. Rhaegar did not kidnap my sister. They were wed. And this boy is their child, the true heir." The words crashed through the room like wildfire through dry wheat. Silence, then fury. Robert exploded. "You bring that dragon spawn here after all that's happened? After Elia and her children were slaughtered? After my brothers died? You dare?" Ned didn't flinch. "Yes, I dare. Because Lyanna is dead. Because Jon is innocent. Because this realm needs more than vengeance. It needs truth. It needs justice. And it needs a future not built on more murder." Robert's hand hovered at the pommel of his sword. For one breathless moment, death seemed inevitable. But then he hesitated. Maybe it was the baby's face. Maybe it was Lyanna's name. Maybe it was Ned standing unshakable before him. Whatever it was, Robert didn't draw steel. But he didn't accept it either. "You're a fool, Stark," he said at last, "and you'll damn us all for it." From that moment, Westeros split at the seams, the court fractured. The lords swore oaths, some to Robert, others to Ned and the boy. The small council raged. Varys whispered warnings of wildfire. Pycelle pleaded for caution. Littlefinger watched it all, smiling faintly, already calculating new games. But Ned had something none of them expected. Momentum. The North rallied behind him. The Vale followed. Jon Arryn, bound by blood and duty, gave his cautious support. Dorne, mourning Elia, hesitated, but even they paused when they heard the child was of Lyanna Stark's womb. It complicated everything. Whispers traveled faster than ravens. The true heir lives, a Stark Targaryen child, Rhaegar's son. The wheel began to spin anew. Cersei Lannister, watching all this unfold beside her furious husband, felt something twist inside her. Rage, fear, but also opportunity. If Ned Stark could upend a kingdom with a baby, so could she. Or she could burn it all down before he did. Tensions escalated. A new council was called, not behind closed doors but in front of the Great Sept. Lords from all corners of Westeros were summoned. A trial of sorts, a reckoning. Ned presented Jon, not as his bastard but as a royal. "I stand not as a traitor but as a brother," he said. "I ask you not to crown me, but to protect this boy. Let the realm heal, not rot." Robert's fury hadn't cooled. "And what of my claim?" he shouted. What of the blood I spilled? The crown I won? Ned stared at him, tired and resolute. You wanted peace. This is the price of it. And then something remarkable happened. The lords listened, not because they believed Ned completely, not because they loved Targaryens, but because they feared what would come next if they didn't. Another war, another rebellion, another river of blood. And Robert, though stubborn, saw it too. So a compromise, a fragile one. Jon Snow, now Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen Stark, would be named heir to the Iron Throne. Raised by Ned, protected in the north, Robert would remain king until his death. No executions, no purges, just a lie rewritten with a new truth. It seemed acceptable, manageable. But peace built on fear never holds. Whispers turned to plots. Cersei, robbed of legacy, began her Cold War. She saw her children as true heirs, not this wolf-dragon boy. The Lannisters began building power silently. The seeds of future treachery took root. In the north, Winterfell transformed. Jon grew not as a bastard, but as royalty. Trained in the sword by Sir Roderick, schooled in politics by Maester Luwin. Loved fiercely by Ned and Catelyn, though the latter took longer. He was still a Targaryen after all, but he was also a Stark. Every lesson was double-edged. Rule with justice, but defend with fire. Jon's dreams were strange, haunted by shadows of dragons, by a wall of ice, by a sword burning with light. He did not yet understand them, but the world did not wait for understanding. In Essos, the exiled Viserys and Daenerys heard whispers of a living heir crowned in Westeros. Rage consumed Viserys. "That throne is mine," he screamed. But it was Dany, quiet and observing, who felt the shift deeper. Her family wasn't gone, but they weren't hers anymore either. And across the sea a red woman saw the flames and smiled. The prince that was promised had risen, but far from her reach. Still, fire had a way of spreading. Years passed. Jon grew into a young man with eyes like storms, and a presence that unsettled even the most hardened warriors. Lords visited Winterfell to swear loyalty. Others came to spy, some to poison. Ned kept a watchful eye on them all, but there was one truth Ned could not protect him from, the truth of war. The throne was not safe. Robert aged, grew bitter, drank more. Cersei played her games with growing boldness. And Jon's existence became the powder keg beneath the realm's brittle peace. The day Robert died, killed not by a boar, but perhaps by intention, the Game of Thrones began anew. And this time, the pieces were already in place. Jon Snow, no longer a Snow, was not a nameless bastard in the Night's Watch. He was the Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, and every soul in Westeros would soon decide whether to kneel to him, or burn because of him, to kneel to him, or burn because of him. Jon stood atop the battlements of Winterfell, the winds sharp and cold as ever, but nothing like the storm rising in the south. Ravens had arrived before dawn. Robert Baratheon, King of the Seven Kingdoms, was dead. The message bore the royal seal, written in a hurried, uneven hand by Grand Maester Pycelle. "A hunting accident," it read. "A boar in the Kingswood." But everyone who mattered understood what that truly meant. The lion had finally moved against the stag Ned Stark had feared this day from the moment he returned. From dawn, with a newborn in his arms and a vow on his lips. He had delayed, bargained, compromised, but the truth could not be kept locked away forever. Robert had grown paranoid, self-destructive, and too easily manipulated. And Cersei Lannister had always played a longer game. Now the realm was exposed. Jon, no longer Snow, no longer hidden, had spent his 16 years living as both heir and outcast. Trained to fight, to lead, to read the politics of silence. Ned had raised him as a son, but also as a king in waiting. Robb was a brother, loyal and strong. Sansa, sweet and sharp. Arya, wild and dangerous. They were a family, and yet he was something else. Something more. The name Targaryen clung to him like a second skin, one he never asked for but could not shed. When the news of Robert's death reached the Great Hall, silence fell like snow. Lords and bannermen exchanged wary glances. They all knew what followed. Succession, blood, war. Ned stood before them, hand clenched tight around the letter that would shape the future. "Robert is gone," he said simply. "But the realm lives, and it must have a ruler." A murmur rippled through the hall. Some expected Ned to claim the crown himself. Others feared he might support one of Robert's bastards, or even allow the Lannisters to move unopposed. But when he turned toward Jon, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder, the message became clear. Prince Jaehaerys of House Targaryen and Stark, trueborn son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, will ascend the Iron Throne, as Robert himself agreed in council years ago. I will ride to King's Landing to enforce this claim, and I will not ride alone. The room erupted, not with cheers but with tension. Some cheered for the North. Others whispered about dragons and rebellion. But the decision had been made. Jon was going to war. In King's Landing, the small council had already begun tearing itself apart. Cersei declared her son Joffrey king by right of Robert's death, ignoring every agreement made with Ned all those years ago. Varys cautioned restraint, speaking of oaths and consequences. Littlefinger laughed, reminding them that power lies not in blood but in perception. And perception, he said, was already turning. The City Watch had been bought. The Red Keep was Lannister now, and Jon Stark Targaryen, heir to the throne, was painted as a threat, a usurper cloaked in wolf's skin. But outside the city, banners were rising. The Vale had not forgotten Jon Arryn's pledge. The Riverlands remembered Lyanna Stark. Dorne remained quiet but watchful, always waiting to strike at their enemies. And in the north, every house under Stark command prepared to march. Jon stood in the godswood before leaving, the old faces in the trees watching in silence. "I don't want it," he said to no one and everyone. "I didn't ask for any of this." Ned stood behind him. "It doesn't matter. You were born for this. You must become what the realm needs, not what you want to be." Jon turned to face him. "And what if I fail?" "You won't," Ned said, but his eyes betrayed the fear behind the words. The march south was long and brutal. Snow turned to mud. Villages were already whispering of rebellion. The Lannisters had moved fast, sending riders to secure loyalty with gold or fire. At Harrenhal, Jon met his first test. The ancient ruin had been claimed by Sir Kevan Lannister, who flew the Lion's banner and held the crossroads. Ned advised negotiation, but Jon, burning with the quiet fury he'd inherited from both dragon and direwolf, chose differently. Under moonlight, they attacked. Silent and swift, the Northmen stormed the gates. Ghost Jon's direwolf moved like a phantom, tearing through enemies as if guided by vengeance. Jon fought with Longclaw, the Valyrian steel blade gifted to him by Ned, and each strike carved a name into the legend he never wanted. By dawn, Harrenhal belonged to him. And with it so did the whispers of the realm. "The dragon wolf lives," they said, "and he brings fire and justice, both." But in the Red Keep, Cersei prepared her own weapons. She did not fear Jon's armies. She feared the truth in his blood. And so she unleashed her most dangerous lie, a forged letter signed in Robert's name, declaring Jon an abomination, a traitor, a bastard born of madness and rape. She sent it to every corner of Westeros. Some believed it, others knew better. But the damage had been done. The war would no longer be about succession. It would be about truth versus lies, justice versus ambition. Jon, riding toward King's Landing, read the copy of the letter himself. It struck him like a blade to the gut, not because it insulted him, but because it was effective. "I thought this was about thrones," he told Ned that night by the fire. "But it's about stories, and hers is louder." "Then make yours louder," Ned replied. "Not with words, with actions." As they reached the Crownlands, ravens began to fly again, this time from Dragonstone, from across the sea. A new name whispered in the wind, Daenerys. Jon had never seen her, never known her, but he felt her approach like a shadow stretching toward him, the last daughter of the Mad King, the one who would become his greatest ally or his deadliest rival. And far in the north, beyond the wall, something stirred. The cold was coming. Stirred. The cold was coming. The skies above King's Landing turned the color of bruised steel as Jon approached with the northern host behind him. He rode not as a conqueror, not yet, but every hoofbeat across the Crownlands echoed a truth that couldn't be ignored. A new king marched on the capital, one with both Stark and Targaryen blood. By the time they reached the Blackwater Rush, the city gates had been sealed. The banners of House Lannister hung defiant from every tower. Cersei had not fled. She waited behind her walls with the boy Joffrey on the throne, and the Red Keep crawling with gold-cloaked loyalists and spies. She would not surrender. She would not yield. And she had no intention of letting Jon set foot inside the city alive. Jon stood before the riverbank, eyes scanning the ramparts in the distance. "They'll fight," he said, Ned nodded, grave as always. She's not Robert. She won't bend. And every day she sits that boy on the throne, she poisons what's left of the realm. Jon's jaw clenched. Then we take it. But it wouldn't be that simple. Inside the Red Keep, Cersei was unraveling. Her face remained cold, unreadable, but her fury burned hotter than wildfire. The northern brat, that dragon-spawned whelp, dared march on her city as if he were the rightful king, as if his existence didn't spit in the face of everything she had built. He had to be crushed, not just defeated, disgraced. "Bring me the wildfire stores," she whispered to Qyburn. "If we lose this city, no one will take it from us." Tyrion, now reinstated on the small council under the guise of diplomacy, caught wind of her plans. "You're mad," he told her bluntly. "You'll kill everyone in this city just to deny it to a boy who hasn't even raised his sword yet?" Cersei's smile was sharp and terrifying. "That's the point." Jon, meanwhile, faced more than just Lannisters. His army had grown in numbers, but not unity. The Vale's men clashed with Northerners. The River Lords distrusted the Martells, who had arrived unannounced, offering quiet support in exchange for Jon's promise to remember Elia Martell's death. Even among his allies, ghosts whispered. Some men called him Dragonspawn, others called him the Future. But all agreed on one thing: this war wouldn't be won without fire and blood. Robb rode beside him, quiet but steady. "Do you ever think," he asked, "about just leaving?" "Let the throne rot. Let them have it." "Every night," Jon replied. But it wouldn't stop the war. Only change the battlefield, and in that he was right, for the Lannisters had already struck first. The Riverlands burned behind them. Raiders sent by Tywin had crossed the borders, torching villages loyal to Jon. In the Westerlands, the gold mines had opened wide again, funding mercenaries. And on the sea, the Greyjoys sniffed opportunity. Their longships cutting through waves toward the Reach. The realm was bleeding already, and the gates of King's Landing hadn't even opened. Jon called a war council on the third night by the river. The torches flickered around a ring of commanders, all hardened by years of quiet tension and now bound by fragile oaths. "Siege is not an option," said the Blackfish, gruff and direct. "The city will starve, but she'll burn it before she opens the gates." "And if we storm it?" asked Jon Royce. "Every man here knows what that looks like." "They're civilians," Jon said, cutting through the noise. "Not soldiers. We don't slaughter innocents to take a throne. That's not how we win." He didn't raise his voice, but the words silenced them all. That night the plan took shape. Not siege, not brute force. Something cleaner. Something impossible. They would infiltrate the city from the old tunnels beneath the city walls, smuggled in through secret paths the Night's Watch had once mapped decades ago when recruiting in Flea Bottom. A strike team, silent, fast, and at its center. Jon.Ned forbade it at first. "You're too important. You can't risk every man in this camp would die for this," Jon interrupted. "I can't ask them to do what I won't. If I'm to rule, I lead." There was no argument after that. The night before the infiltration, Jon sat with his sword across his lap, staring into the flames of the campfire. Arya joined him quietly, her face half-shadowed. She hadn't spoken much since arriving from the Vale with Gendry and a pack of wolves behind her. But now she sat close. "You're not the same as before," she said softly. "Neither are you," Jon replied. "You were always quiet. But now, feels like there's something burning under your skin." Jon didn't answer for a long time. Then, "Sometimes I feel like I'm standing at the edge of something terrible, and I don't know if I'm supposed to stop it or fall into it." Arya touched the hilt of needle. "Then don't fall." They went in before dawn. Ghost led the way through the tunnels, silent as death. With Jon were Arya, Brienne of Tarth, Gendry, and Ser Davos, who knew the city's underbelly better than any map. They emerged in the shadows of the Sept of Baelor, cloaked and unseen. But nothing stays quiet in King's Landing for long. A spy spotted them. A bell rang. The gold cloaks flooded the streets. Steel met steel in the alleyways as the small group carved a path toward the Red Keep. Arya disappeared into the shadows, killing with silence. Brienne blocked blow after blow, her oath to Catelyn Stark driving every strike. Gendry fell behind, bloodied but alive. Davos took a blade in the side but kept moving. Jon reached the gates of the keep, blood on his sword, face streaked with soot and fury. The doors opened before him, not by chance but by betrayal. Tyrion stood inside, holding the master key. "This is madness," he said, breathless. "But it's better than letting Cersei burn the city." And then the horns blew. The gates opened from within, and the northern army surged forward. Cersei watched it all unfold from the throne room, lips curled in rage, wildfire candles waiting beneath the floor. Qyburn urged her to flee. "No," she spat. "Let them come. But even wildfire cannot stop destiny." Jon burst into the throne room like a storm, sword drawn. Behind him the Kingsguard fell. Cersei stood alone. The boy King Joffrey had already been whisked away by Jaime, who made his choice in silence. Jon approached the Iron Throne. "You think you've won?" Cersei hissed. "You think a bastard and a wolf can sit here without turning to ash?" "I don't want the throne," Jon said. "But I won't let you destroy what's left of the realm." Cersei smiled, wicked and cold. "Then you're weak." She reached for the hidden blade at her side, but Arya was already there, her own blade at Cersei's throat. "Don't," Arya said flatly. "You're not worth the blood." For the first time, Cersei faltered, and then she laughed, quiet, broken, and terrifying. "You think this ends with me?" But Jon wasn't listening. He turned toward the throne and paused. Behind him, footsteps echoed. Ned, Robb, Tyrion, Brienne, all watching. All waiting. The Iron Throne stood there in silence, cold, jagged, and hungry, and Jon stared at it, unsure if he was meant to sit or destroy it. Or destroy it. Jon didn't move. His eyes locked onto the Iron Throne like it was something alive, breathing, whispering, waiting. The torchlight danced across its twisted swords, casting long shadows that stretched like claws toward him. So many had died for this chair. His father, his mother, the children of Elia Martell, even Rhaegar. Their ghosts lingered in the steel. Behind him the silence thickened. Ned was watching him with the weight of 1,000 unspoken warnings. Robb stood by the ruined doors, blood on his face, heart pounding like a war drum. Tyrion, breathless from the climb, watched with cautious eyes, calculating always. Arya, quiet and invisible as death, leaned against a column with her blade still red from the fight. And Brienne, shield lowered, stood between Jon and anything that might rise to harm him. The Iron Throne had never been so vulnerable, or so dangerous, and Jon knew what it meant to take it. He'd known from the moment they set foot on the King's Road. This throne was not a prize. It was a curse dressed in glory. It did not lift men, it broke them. Every king that sat upon it left blood behind. Some on the steps, some in their souls. Still, the realm needed a ruler. The war was not over. And Westeros did not survive on good intentions. It survived on crowns. Jon turned to Ned. "I didn't come here for this." Ned stepped forward, voice low. "You were born for this." Jon looked back at the throne. "I was born because two people loved each other, in a world that wouldn't allow it. That doesn't mean I'm meant to rule it." Tyrion stepped into the circle, brushing soot from his cloak. "With respect, Prince or King or whatever we're calling you now, that throne is a monster. But it's a monster someone has to chain. Better you than the next madman waiting in line." Jon's fists clenched. "There's always another madman. And they'll come faster if you leave a vacuum," Tyrion said. "You may not want power, but that's precisely why you should wield it. The ones who chase thrones are never the ones who should sit on them." Robb finally spoke. "So what happens now?" "We hold the city. Wait for the Lannisters to strike again." Tyrion answered before Jon could. "We've already begun. Half the realm will call this treason. The other half will call it justice. And somewhere in between is war. The word hit like a hammer, and it was true. The moment Jon stepped into that throne room, a second rebellion had begun. In the Westerlands, Tywin Lannister had not moved an inch. He had never trusted Cersei to hold the capital, nor Jaime to protect Joffrey. Now, with both defeated or absent, he would strike hard and fast. His armies would march east. River Run would burn again. And in Dorne, Oberyn Martell had begun to rally his own banners, not for vengeance this time, but ambition. The old balance was gone, and then came the Raven. Jon broke the seal with hands still shaking from the battle. The wax bore the sigil of House Targaryen. Not his seal, hers Daenerys Stormborn. She had landed at Dragonstone, not with whispers, but with fire. Her letter was direct, proud, and laced with warning. "I am Daenerys of House Targaryen, the first of her name, rightful queen of the Andals, the Rhoynar, and the first men. I have come to reclaim the throne stolen from my family. I offer peace to those who bend the knee, and to those who do not, I offer only fire. There was no mention of him. Not by name. Not by blood. Either she didn't know or she didn't care. Jon read the letter aloud to the War Council. The room stiffened. Ned's eyes narrowed. She's bold, but she doesn't know the full truth. She doesn't care, Arya said coldly. She wants the throne. You're in her way. Tyrion paced near the window. I know her. I served her briefly. She believes in breaking chains, but she's not above using them when it suits her. Robb crossed his arms. So what do we do? Fight her too? Jon folded the letter. No, we speak to her. She deserves to know. Ned frowned. And if she demands your crown, then we'll deal with that when it comes. The meeting ended with tension crackling in the air. No one wanted to face dragons. No one wanted to fight another Targaryen. But war wasn't just coming, it had arrived. Jon sent a raven to Dragonstone. No demands. No threats. Only the truth. You are not alone in your claim. I am Jon, son of Rhaegar and Lyanna, raised by Eddard Stark. I seek peace, not power. Let us speak before the realm is torn apart again. He sent Ghost with the messenger, a show of trust. The direwolf would not leave his side unless Jon ordered it. Then he waited. 3 days later she came. The dragons arrived first. The skies darkened with their wings. People screamed in the streets of King's Landing, hiding beneath carts and stone steps. Dragon and Rhaegal circled the city walls like vultures eyeing a corpse. The message was clear. Jon stood in the courtyard of the Red Keep when she landed. Daenerys dismounted without fear, her silver hair catching the sunlight. She wore black and red, her eyes burning with suspicion and something else. Recognition? They looked at each other like two storms meeting at sea. So, she said, her voice calm but edged, the North sends its bastard to claim the Iron Throne. Jon didn't flinch. I am no bastard, she studied him. You have Rhaegar's eyes, he nodded, and my mother's courage. A pause stretched between them, long uneasy. You wrote to me, she said, yes, and you claimed the throne. No, Jon said firmly. I was named heir by council. I didn't ask for it, but you accepted it. I accepted responsibility. There's a difference. Daenerys stepped closer, dragons growling low behind her. I have crossed deserts, seas, and fire to sit where you stand. And you expect me to share it. I expect you to think about what happens if we don't. Another silence, then she said, You're not what I expected. And neither are you, she almost smiled, almost. That night they met in private. Not as enemies, but not yet as allies. They spoke of Rhaegar, of Lyanna, of Viserys, of Aerys. They spoke of justice, of fear, of power, of what it meant to rule. And they understood each other, not entirely, but more than anyone else ever could. But there was one truth neither could ignore. There could only be one ruler. And behind both of them, the dead marched. In the far north, beyond the crumbling wall, the Night King moved, silent, relentless, unseen, and no one was watching, because the living were too busy fighting over a throne made of swords. Winterfell no longer felt like home. The chill in the air wasn't just from snow or wind. It was the cold breath of something ancient and waking. Bran Stark sat beneath the weirwood tree, eyes pale, unmoving. He hadn't spoken in days. His skin had grown paler, thinner, like something from a dream or a nightmare. The ravens perched all around him, silent, waiting, watching, and then finally, he whispered it. The wall has fallen. Maester Vulcan heard him from across the godswood and dropped the scrolls in his hands. The wall had fallen. News travelled slowly from the far north. Faster than ravens, but slower than fear. At Eastwatch, the last flames had already turned to smoke. The Night King had marched with a purpose that defied belief. No more hiding in snowstorms. No more testing the edges of the realm. He had come not just to kill, but to conquer, and he had a dragon. The one Daenerys had lost in the battle beyond the wall, now turned, now dead. Now something else entirely. By the time the ravens reached King's Landing, Jon was already gone. He had left with Daenerys together. Not as lovers, not yet, but as something more dangerous. Two people bound by legacy and fear, trying to save a world that didn't believe in monsters anymore. The council in the Red Keep had splintered. Some called Jon a fool for trusting the Dragon Queen. Others called Daenerys a conqueror, hiding behind noble words. Tyrion, as hand, tried to keep order, but every lord and lady had begun looking toward the north, not with caution, but with dread. For the first time in centuries, winter had a face. And it wasn't a Stark. It was something older than names, something colder than history. Jon, Daenerys, Arya, and a small host rode north. The dragons flew above, casting shadows over the riverlands as peasants screamed and bowed in equal measure. Winterfell had sent riders to clear the roads, but snow had made progress slow. Along the way they passed burned villages, nothing taken, nothing looted. Just silence and corpses. As they crossed the neck, Sam Tarly arrived from Old Town with ancient texts and terrible news. He met them at Moat Cailin, breathless, scrolls tied to his back and eyes wide with sleepless nights. "They're not just marching," he said. "They're following ley lines, old paths, magic ones. They're moving toward something," Jon asked. "Toward what?" Sam looked down. "The crypts of Winterfell." No one spoke. Daenerys frowned. Why would they care about a tomb? But Jon knew. Winterfell was not just a stronghold. It was the last resting place of the blood of the first men, the place of kings. And buried deep within, if the legends were true, were bones older than the wall itself. The Night King wasn't just coming for death. He was coming for legacy. They rode harder. When they reached Winterfell, the snow was already falling thick and constant. Bran was waiting in the courtyard, his voice flat and hollow. "He's close," Jon dismounted, staring at the boy he once called brother. But Bran wasn't a boy anymore. "He wasn't even Bran. You saw him?" Jon asked. "I see everything." Daenerys stepped forward, unsure, her eyes flickering with the same disbelief that Jon had once carried. "How do we fight him?" Bran tilted his head. "You don't." Jon's hand found the hilt of his sword. "Then what?" "You survive long enough to remember. Or no one will." The defenses began immediately. The walls were reinforced. Dragon-glass weapons were forged in the fires below the castle. The forges burned day and night. Arya helped train the new recruits, boys who barely held swords, girls who had never held anything heavier than a loaf of bread. Everyone was needed. Tormund and Beric arrived days later, battered and bloodied. "Eastwatch is gone," Tormund said grimly. "The dead don't rest, and they don't slow." The dragons circled above Winterfell, fierce and restless. Rhaegal still answered to Jon, though he had not claimed it. Drogon kept to Daenerys, but even he sensed what approached. Below ground, the crypts were quiet, but not empty. Sam and Bran began poring through ancient texts. One scroll spoke of the Horn of Winter, a mythical weapon that could break any wall, not just of stone, but of magic. Another spoke of a king buried with ice in his veins, older than even the first men. "Do you believe in any of this?" Jon asked Sam. "I didn't used to," Sam replied. "But I didn't used to believe in White Walkers either." Meanwhile, the southern lords bickered. Some refused to send troops. Others sent only tokens, wagons of food, a few hundred spears. Cersei had promised men and horses, but none had come. She played her game still, even as the dead marched. And then came the first storm. At dusk, the horns sounded, not from the walls but from the trees. Scouts, riders sent beyond the Wolfswood, had returned. Only one made it. And he wasn't riding. He staggered through the snow, covered in blood, lips frozen together. He dropped to his knees before Jon. "Thousands," he gasped. "Maybe tens of thousands. We tried to light the fires. They walked through the flames." His heart stopped mid-sentence. Winterfell was surrounded by nightfall. The battle did not begin with swords, or fire, or roaring dragons. It began with silence, the kind that strangles a man's lungs. The kind that makes even the bravest warriors forget their names. The kind that says you are already dead. You just haven't fallen yet. Jon stood atop the wall, Longclaw at his side, and looked into the white fog. There were no horns, no war drums, no speeches, only the sound of bones scraping ice. Daenerys joined him, her eyes scanning the nothingness. "Do you think they feel fear?" she asked. Jon shook his head. "I don't think they feel anything at all." The ground began to tremble. The dragons roared from above, and in the mist beyond the trees, the Night King stepped into view. He wore no crown, carried no banner. His army stretched behind him like a storm-given shape. Jon looked to Daenerys. "We hold the line," she nodded once. "And if we fall, then we make sure they remember why." And with that, the battle for the living began. Snow fell in thick, swirling sheets, coating the world in silence just before it shattered. The dead did not scream, did not howl, did not chant. They simply moved, relentless, numberless, inevitable. Winterfell. The ancient stronghold of the first men stood like a defiant candle in the dark, its flickering flames tiny against the massive shadow crashing toward it. From atop the walls, Jon Stark, Targaryen by blood, Stark by soul, watched the sea of white-blue eyes emerge from the fog. He didn't blink. He didn't speak. This was no longer a war for thrones. This was the war for existence itself. The horns blew once, twice, then a third time, long and low, the signal for the fire trenches to be lit. Tormund led the first wave of defenders across the snowy field to where the ditches had been laid. Archers set their arrows ablaze. Flames streaked through the falling snow, landing with hissing bursts in the shallow trenches carved days earlier. The fire roared up in a circle around the fortress, thin, narrow, but hot enough to hold back wights. For a moment the army of the dead hesitated. Then they surged forward, as if a switch had been flipped in a hive mind. They threw themselves into the fire, not with hesitation, but with purpose. Their corpses ignited, screamed, collapsed, and others climbed over them. The flames died down. The trench had bought them minutes. No more. Jon stood at the center of the walls with Daenerys beside him, both watching in mounting horror. Drogon and Rhaegal circled in the skies, their eyes glowing in the dark. Jon gave the command, his voice steady. Now, Rhaegal dove first, followed by Drogon. Their fire lit the battlefield in sudden, violent bursts, waves of flame turning ice to steam. Thousands of wights burned, but still they came. For every one that died, 5 more crawled over the bodies. On the battlements, Arya moved like a shadow, silent, precise, deadly. Every blade she carried dripped with dragonglass. She didn't waste time. She didn't hesitate. She killed, and she moved. Brienne and Podrick fought side by side at the front gate, their shields splintering, their arms bleeding, but their eyes clear. They knew this night was not for glory. It was for survival. Below the ground, in the crypt, Sansa stood with Gilly, Sam's baby in her arms, surrounded by terrified children, old men, and the wounded. Maester Woken recited prayers, his voice shaking. They all told themselves this was the safest place. None of them believed it anymore. And then it happened. Bran's eyes turned white beneath the weirwood. His mind flew north, far beyond the battlefield, far into the darkness. The Night King looked up, directly at him, and then the storm broke. He rode in silence atop Viserion, his undead dragon, flames of pale blue spewing from its mouth. The wall of fire split open like wet parchment. Wights flooded in. The defenders fell back. Screams echoed against stone. Ghost Jon's direwolf tore through the snowdrift, blood-stained and snarling. Jon mounted Rhaegal, Daenerys took Drogon. They rose into the storm like twin gods of fire and fury. Above the clouds, the storm raged with unnatural cold. They didn't wait. They went straight for the Night King. The dragons collided in the sky. Viserion screamed as Rhaegal bit into his shoulder, ripping flesh from bone. Fire clashed with frost. Blue flames seared Drogon's wing. Jon held tight as Rhaegal clawed and roared and dove. The dragons weren't just fighting. They were remembering. They were brothers once, now only enemies. Jon leapt from Rhaegal's back mid-air, landing hard in the outer courtyard where the Night King had dismounted. Snow cracked beneath his boots. His breath came out like smoke. The Night King turned slowly to face him. He didn't draw a weapon. He didn't need to. Jon raised Longclaw, no words, no insults. Just war. Their blades met once, then twice, sparks flying. Jon moved fast, slashing, rolling, using everything Ser Rodrik had taught him. But the Night King was stronger, colder, ancient. Every strike he blocked with ease. Every step he took seemed to freeze the air around him. Longclaw finally connected with his armor. It cracked. The Night King faltered. And then he smiled. With one hand he raised it slowly. Behind Jon the corpses began to rise again, every soldier who had died, every friend, every stranger. They stood, they turned, and they charged. Jon turned to fight them off, but there were too many. Brienne had fallen. Gendry too. Arya was still moving, but barely. Sam bled from a cut across his chest, eyes wild with terror. The Night King turned his back and walked toward the godswood, toward Bran, toward history. Daenerys dove on Drogon, fire spewing in a last desperate attack, but Viserion blocked her path, flames crashing in mid-air. The dragons circled each other in a sky blacker than night. Jon fought through the chaos, swinging, screaming, bleeding. He made it to the gate, but a horde of whites blocked his path to the godswood. He was too late. In the crypts, the walls began to crack, bones began to move. The dead Starks of Winterfell stirred in their tombs. Sansa held the baby tighter, and in the godswood, Bran waited beneath the tree. He opened his eyes as the Night King stepped into the snow-covered circle, and he whispered, "It's time." The godswood had never been silent. Even in winter, the trees rustled, the wind whispered, the heart tree breathed. But now it was dead quiet. No birds, no breeze, no breath. Bran sat beneath the heart tree, unmoving, his eyes clear but distant. The weirwood's face wept with frozen red sap, a ghostly echo of blood. Snow fell gently on Bran's shoulders, clinging to him like the touch of old gods watching through time. And then the Night King stepped into the clearing. No guards, no dragons, no war cries, just him. His armor shimmered with frost. His eyes, endless and empty, locked on Bran's with silent recognition. Not anger, not malice, just inevitability. Bran didn't move, he didn't need to, because Arya Stark was already there. She dropped from the shadows above, needle-thin blade flashing from her sleeve. Her face was blank. Her scream was silent. Her leap was perfect. She aimed for his back, but the Night King turned. He caught her by the throat, fast as death, and lifted her off the ground. Her blade clattered to the snow. She kicked, clawed, but he didn't flinch. His grip was cold enough to burn, and then Bran moved. Not his body, his mind. He closed his eyes, and the world shattered. Every raven in the godswood exploded into flight. Every tree groaned. Every echo of the old gods screamed through the roots. Time bent, the wind howled, and in that moment, Arya dropped her dagger. It fell, spun, caught by her other hand, and she plunged it into the Night King's chest, right where the first children of the forest had driven the obsidian long ago. There was no scream, no roar, just cracking. His eyes went wide. Then he shattered, ice spraying across the godswood like glass thrown from a tower. The White Walkers collapsed. The whites fell. Silent and lifeless, the storm ended everywhere across the battlefield. The dead dropped. Brienne, covered in blood, looked up in disbelief. Tormund screamed in triumph. Davos wept. Gendry fell to his knees, clutching his ribs. Sam collapsed beside a pile of bodies, hands shaking. And Jon, he stood in the courtyard, staring at the sky. Rhaegal hovered above, crying out into the void. Viserion fell from the air in pieces, dead for good. Jon dropped Longclaw. It was over. It was over. Winter had been defeated, but the cost. Thousands lay dead. Jorah Mormont, torn apart defending Daenerys, lay at her feet. His last breath had been her name. Theon Greyjoy, broken but whole, had died in the godswood. Charging at the Night King before Arya's strike, Lyanna Mormont had slain a giant white with a spear through its eye, and been crushed beneath its corpse. So many, too many, the fires burned all night. Great pyres across Winterfell. Jon lit the first. Then Daenerys. Then Sansa. The flames rose into the sky as if trying to reach those they had lost. The next day, the snow stopped. The first dawn in weeks painted Winterfell in soft gold, but the war was not over, for the living were still divided. Daenerys stood at the battlements, her expression unreadable as Jon approached. Her hair was singed, her eyes rimmed with grief. She had saved the North. She had lost her people, and still the realm did not call her queen. "You killed the Night King," Jon said softly. She shook her head. "She did, Arya." Jon smiled faintly. "That's how Starks do things." Daenerys didn't smile. She turned to face him. "You have a choice to make. I know, don't say it lightly. I have dragons. You have the North. Together we save the world. Alone we burn it again." Jon stepped closer. "We were meant to fight the darkness, not each other." She looked him in the eyes. "Then tell them. Tell the realm we rule together." As one, he hesitated, then said, "There's something I need to do." First, he rode that night to the crypts. Bran was waiting. "You know what you have to do," the boy said calmly. Jon didn't answer at first. He looked at the tomb of Lyanna Stark, his mother, the one they all lied to protect, the one who had died for love. "She gave me life," Jon whispered. "And I gave her a lie." "No," Bran said. "You gave her a legacy." Jon turned. "I'm not a king. I never wanted to be. That's why you must." Jon Stark, Targaryen by blood, stood before the Northern. Lords 3 days later, he told them everything, the truth about his parents, about Rhaegar, about Lyanna, about the promise Ned Stark made to protect a child no one wanted to live. And when he finished, they knelt, not for the dragon, but for the wolf. Even Sansa, even Arya, they crowned him king in the north and south. Not Jon Snow, not Jaehaerys Targaryen, just Jon and Daenerys. She did not kneel. She stood tall, proud, regal, and walked away from the hall. That night she left Winterfell. She flew back to Dragonstone, and the realm held its breath. And the realm held its breath. The sea crashed against the black rocks of Dragonstone, loud and angry like a storm that refused to pass. Daenerys stood at the edge of the cliff, cloak whipping in the wind. Drogon perched behind her like a shadow made flesh. She had come back to where it all began. Not as a girl in exile, but as a queen scorned by the people she had helped save. Jon had not followed. He hadn't sent a raven. He hadn't come to speak. She had given everything, her armies, her dragons, her heart, and in return the North had crowned him alone. Jon Snow, the reluctant heir, the quiet wolf, the man who said he didn't want the throne, and then took it. Missandei stood behind her in silence. Grey Worm sharpened his blade on the shore, his eyes colder now, less human. The Unsullied had followed her to the ends of the world. The Dothraki had burned for her, and now she stood alone in a realm that bowed to the man with the right name, not the right heart. Will he come? Missandei asked quietly. Daenerys didn't answer. She didn't know, but deep down, she feared the answer was no. In the north, Jon ruled with hesitation. The crown had been placed on his head, not taken by his hands. The lords of Westeros, weary and leaderless, had chosen him because he was safe, because he was honorable, because he was not a Lannister, because he was not a dragon. But Jon wasn't built for thrones. The weight of leadership sat heavy on him. Every day brought another letter, another request, another whisper of rebellion. The Reach was restless. Dawn had closed its gates. The Iron Islands pledged loyalty, but moved their ships with suspicious freedom. And most of all, the South remained fractured. Daenerys had not answered his messages. She had not returned. Arya watched him from the shadows, quiet as ever. She won't kneel, she told him one morning. And she won't wait forever. Jon sat in the great hall of Winterfell, the crown heavy on